The summit of presidents of South America is underway in Brazil with an agenda focused on strengthening regional integration. In Peru, social organizations in at least 13 regions of Puno ratified a 24-hour strike to demand the resignation of designated President Dina Boluarte. After a drone attack on residential buildings in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that Kiev chose the path of terrorist activities and attacked civilians. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Brazil, a summit of South American presidents to discuss regional integration was inaugurated on Tuesday. Presidents and representatives from South American countries arrived in Brasilia to attend the meeting hosted by Brazilian President Luis Ignacio da Silva, who also delivered the opening speech. After the meeting kicked off, the heads of states took an official photo in which they held hands, showing their intention of boosting regional integration. In his opening remarks, da Silva called for South American unity to defend democracy. He also called for deepening economic integration in order to break the reliance on foreign currency. At the same time, he insisted on updating common projects, taking action against climate change, and guaranteeing attention to vulnerable populations. Finally, Lula also emphasized the need to resume dialogue through integration and cooperation mechanisms, such as the South American Union of Nations, UNASUR.
We don't have time to waste. South America has in front of it once again the opportunity to take the path of union, and we don't have to start from scratch. UNASUR is a collective heritage that is in force. 7 countries are still full members, so it is important to resume that construction process. But we must do it critically and see what didn't work to solve those problems. We need coordination mechanisms that are flexible to confirm the agility and implementation of initiatives. Our decision will have legitimacy if we take them and are implemented in a democratic way.
In turn, the Brazilian head of state, Lula da Silva, called for the creation of a multilateral commission to follow up on the agreements resulting from the meeting of South American leaders.
I think it is essential to create a high-level group with personal representative of each president to continue the work of reflection based on what we decide today. This group will have 120 days to present a map that will be the path for the integration of South America.
Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro and his Argentinian counterpart Alberto Fernandez met on Tuesday in Brazil to analyze the status of bilateral relations and the cooperation between the two countries. The meeting took place during the summit of South American leaders, which seeks to promote integration in the region in different areas. The two leaders spoke for the first time since the Argentinian head of state assumed the presidency on December 10, 2019. Fernandez was accompanied by his Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship, Santiago Cafiero, and other authorities. On the other hand, President Maduro was joined by his Foreign Minister, Ivan Gil, and the Deputy to the National Assembly, Nicolás Maduro Guerra. In Peru, social organizations in at least 13 regions of Puno ratified a 24-hour strike to demand the resignation of designated President Dina Boluarte. The strike is part of the resumption of protests against the Boluarte administration, a measure that was agreed upon by the leaders of the different provinces of Puno region in a meeting held Saturday, May the 27th. The objective of the strike is to reiterate the unwavering demands for Boluarte's resignation, dismissal of Congress, and that a constituent assembly be put in place. They are also denouncing that justice has not been served in the case of those assassinated during the protests against Boluarte. Colombian authorities said to be positive that the 4 indigenous children missing for almost a month in the Amazon are alive and insist on searching for them. The children, aged 13, 9, and 4, plus an 11-month-old baby, were traveling with their mother and 2 other adults in a small plane that crashed on May 1st in the dense jungle of the southeast of the country. Unlike the adults, their bodies were not in the aircraft or in the surrounding area. With tracking dogs, almost 200 military and indigenous men have found their belongings, a makeshift shelter, and a fruit that had been bitten in the area. The area is inhabited by jaguars, pumas, snakes, and other predators. There is also the presence of guerrillas who walked away from the peace pact signed by the FARC in 2016. President Gustavo Petro reported on May 17th that the children had been found, but the next day he retracted and regretted the false information. In Colombia, the 7th Committee of the House of Representatives in Congress began discussing the labor reform put forward by Gustavo Petro administration. The debate will take place in the midst of a controversy brought on mainly by sectors of the opposition, which have disqualified the proposal presented by Labor Minister Gloria Inés Ramírez. According to Minister Ramírez, the reform includes legal and political concepts of institutions and countries such as Mexico, Chile, and the International Labour Organization, among others. On March 16th, the government of change filed the labor reform bill in a symbolic and historic ceremony at the Arms Square of the Casa de Nariño presidential headquarters. This reform seeks to guarantee and improve the rights of the nearly 22 million Colombian workers, 8 million of whom are women. In Honduras, the operation known as Penitentiary Foundation, promoted by the government of President Xiomara Castro, found important discoveries in one of the country's prisons. Some 2,500 police and army personnel participated in the initiative. According to the commission headed by the Vice Minister of Security, Julissa Villanueva, during the process of disarmament, communication blockades and other strategies in the prison known as El Pozo, hiding places with firearms, explosives, and ammunition were discovered. In this maximum security penitentiary center located in the department of Santa Barbara, they managed to extract from several coves the fragmentation grenades, 11 firearms, and more than 300 projectiles. They also found cell phones and internet antennas, among other objects prohibited for the inmates. In April, there were shootings between gang members in 4 prisons in Honduras that left dead and wounded. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. French unions on Monday called on employees to participate in a massive day of protest against the pension reform on June 6, aiming to denounce once again the government's desire to prevent a vote on the issue in Parliament. The call for the 14th day of strikes and demonstrations is set 2 days before Parliament studies a bill presented by the Overseas Territories Libertarian and Independence Parliamentary Group with the aim of repealing the reform which the government considers unconstitutional and intends to torpedo. The organizers of the June 6 mobilization warned that if once again the government insists on forcing the situation using constitutional tricks, the indignation will only increase.
The unions are calling on workers, young people and pensioners to make June the 6th a big day of strikes and demonstrations across the country to win the withdrawal of the pension reform and for social advances. The unions are calling on members of parliament to vote on the cross-party bill regarding the pensions reform on June the 8th so that the crisis can be finally resolved. Otherwise, if once again the government insists on using constitutional tricks to force its way through, the anger will only increase. This reform is brutal and unfair for workers and young people, who have all clearly understood that they will have to work longer without employers or public sector employers ever having to contribute. It is vital that this reform is withdrawn so that progress can finally be made on workers' concerns.
In Greece, the former president of the state-owned railroad company has been indicted in connection with the train accident that killed 57 people back in February. Former railroad company chairman Spiros Pateras and 2 other executives have been charged with dereliction of duty and could face up to 2 years in prison. The accusation is based on the fact that they hired, as of chief of the Larissa station where the accident occurred, an employee who was over to statutory age for the position. The said employee was also indicted, and he admitted in court that he had placed a passenger train on the same track of a freight convoy traveling in the opposite direction, with which it ended up in collision. After the drone attack on residential buildings in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that while Moscow carries out attacks on military targets on the Ukrainian territory, Kiev shows the path of terrorist activities and attacks civilians. Putin confirmed that the Russian armed forces attacked Ukraine's military intelligence headquarters on Sunday, recorded to the journalist that Ukraine declared itself a neutral state when it became independent, and instead it gradually embarked on a different path of joining NATO, an organization that is hostile to Russia and was created solely to fight the Soviet Union and Russia. The president remarked that they only lied to Moscow and said there will be no NATO expansion eastward, but also reach out to Ukraine. Previously, the foreign ministry said that Russia reserves the right to take the most severe measures following Tuesday's Ukrainian drone attack.
We have already mentioned the possibility of strikes against decision-making centers. The Ukrainian military intelligence headquarters, which was attacked 2 or 3 days ago, is one of them. Moscow's air defense system worked normally satisfactorily, although there is some work to do.
Serbs continued to gather in front of vacant City Hall on Tuesday after violent clashes with NATO-led peacekeepers, resulting in 30 soldiers being injured. Local media reported that soldiers from the NATO-led Kosovo force dressed in riot gear placed a metal barrier around this vacant municipal building and prevented entry to the City Hall. Serbs demanded withdrawal of police forces from Kosovo, as well as ethnic Albanian mayors whom they do not consider them their true representatives. In the meantime, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić declared that 52 demonstrators had been injured, 3 of them seriously, and 5 Serbs were arrested for taking part in protests against NATO forces. On Tuesday, the government of China supported Serbia's efforts to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity following increased tensions between Serbs and NATO troops in northern Kosovo.
China is closely following the developments and supports Serbia's efforts to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity. We oppose the unilateral actions of the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina and call on it to seriously fulfill its obligations to establish the community of Serb-majority municipalities. We urge NATO to seriously respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the relevant countries and really do what is conducive to regional peace.
On Monday in Turkey, a 69-year-old President Recep Tayyip Erdogan appealed for national unity in his first address to the nation after winning a historic runoff election that will effectively extend his transformative mandate to 2028. By then, he would have spent 20 years public office.
Our proposal of Turkey's century was accepted by our nation both on May 14 and May 28. Our people first gave the majority in the parliament to the People's Alliance with 323 deputies and gave them the presidency to myself with 52.18% of the vote, saying, "Let stability continue and let Turkey grow for 5 more years."
teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the south. At least 10 people were killed in India on Tuesday and 55 others were injured when a bus carrying Hindu pilgrims to a shrine in the Kashmir area fell from a highway bridge into a gorge in the Himalayas. Police sources reported that the bus was on its way to Katra city from Armistar city in the northern state of Punjab when it fell into a gorge near Jammu city. Local police officer Chandan Kohli told reporters that the bus was overloaded. Residents and authorities rushed to the scene, started a rescue operation, and immediately took to the injured to hospitals for medical help. In Bahrain, hundreds of citizens took to the streets in rejection of the execution of 2 compatriots in Saudi Arabia. Demonstrations took place on Monday night in Dar Kulaib, the hometown of the 2 men executed, Jafar Sultan and Sadek Tam. On its part, Riyadh said the executions were carried out after the court found them guilty of belonging to a militant group plotting to destabilize the 2 kingdoms in the Middle East. The specialized criminal court convicted the 2 men of promoting chaos and smuggling explosives to be used inside Saudi Arabia. In Senegal, the leader of the opposition, Ousmane Sonko, announced on Tuesday that he was being illegally held by security forces and urged the population to take to the streets to protest against the government of President Macky Sall.
In the name of what? In a country that claims to be a democratic Can we hold a citizen whose only wrong is to be a firm and fierce opponent of the regime of Macky Sall? It's time for us Senegalese to take responsibility for coming out and facing Macky Sall. And I call for that, a national surge, a national resistance movement in accordance with our constitution to face Macky Sall, because it is no longer a criminal dictatorship. The dictatorship is already standing up and resolutely moving towards its objectives.
The leader of the Senegalese Patriots for Work, Ethics and Fraternity Party, Ousmane Sonko, is notorious for his anti-government harangues and against the President of the Republic, Macky Sall, whom he accuses of wanting to be re-elected in next year's general elections despite the constitutional prohibition to that effect. The politician, who is a parliamentary deputy, faces accusations of defamation, insults and forgery by the Minister of Tourism, Mame Mbeye Niang, in a process that his loyalists affirm tries to prevent him from presenting his candidacy in the next election. On the other hand, he also faces accusations of rape and death threats filed by an employee of a beauty salon, and a decision is expected on June 1st, and according to Senegalese prosecutor, could be a 10-year jail sentence. On Tuesday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived at Melchior Ndadaye International Airport in Bujumbura, Burundi's economic capital and African youth capital, accompanied by a 25-member delegation. Albert Shingiro, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Development Cooperation of Burundi, received his Russian counterpart in a visit aimed at exchanging and deepening the ties of friendship, solidarity and fraternity between their governments and peoples. Shingiro indicated that they are looking to the future to see how to further diversify the areas of cooperation, and added that they are currently preparing cooperation agreements to be signed in Moscow at the Russian-African Summit to be held in July 2023. Shingiro concluded that the agreements of common interest focus on education, health, energy, civil service, justice, but also on the use of nuclear energy for peaceful and civilian purposes. Ugandan activists called on the international community to impose sanctions on human rights violators after President Yoweri Museveni signed an anti-gay law described as one of the toughest in the world. Museveni defied warnings that the passage of the much criticized anti-homosexuality law would strain ties between Kampala and its key international partners. Among other harsh measures, the new law prescribes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality in certain circumstances. Although Uganda has not applied capital punishment for many years, the measure has provoked protests and calls for a strong response from Uganda's diplomatic and financial backers. Human rights organizations have warned that the dangerous and discriminatory law would further reduce the space for civil society under Museveni, whose government has become increasingly authoritarian since he took power in 1986. Well, we have come to the end of this news brief, and you can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.